All right, we've got Adam here, and as befits an editor, he has an impressive bookcase behind him. Very nice. So we are delighted to have editor extraordinary Adam Keiper join us for our open house tonight. Adam is a longtime friend. In fact, I was his intern when I first came to DC back in the early 2000s, and he was the editor of the New Atlantis, a journal of technology and society. Adam remains a senior editor at the New Atlantis and is a contributing editor to the American Purpose, National Affairs, and Current. He was editor of the much missed Books and Arts section of the Weekly Standard until the magazine closed in December 2018. You're like moving a lot, Adam. Looking good though. Right. Excellent. Well, we're lucky to have the benefit of Adam's long experience and insight about starting out as a writer, endearing yourself to editors, is very important, and pursuing a career in the higher journalism of ideas. So I'm going to start by asking Adam a few questions, and then I'm going to turn things over to you. Please submit questions via the Zoom Q&A feature, just like you did for Mary Elizabeth. But in this case, if your question is selected to make this inhuman environment maybe like a little bit more human, we'll let you actually ask Adam your own question. So you should be ready to turn on your camera and your mic. Now, I realize that some of you are not prepared for this eventuality. You may still be in your pajamas. You may be on your phone. Just you don't have a great connection, whatever. If that's the case, send your question, just write text only, and then I'll read it on your behalf. Before we turn to Adam, we have another book raffle, and I think Nico is going to announce the lucky winners via Zoom chat. And these people are very lucky because one winner is going to get a copy of the excellent Eva Brand's Paradoxes of Education in a Republic. She's a legendary teacher at St. John's College, so this is going to be a terrific book for you to read. And then the other winner will receive a copy of the great Leon Cass's. So Adam is going to approve of is going to receive a copy of Leon Cass's The Beginning of Wisdom. So that's a great book. All right, and it looks like our winners are Carla Castellanos, and she'll be getting the copy of Miss Brand's Paradoxes, and Catherine Wickberg, very lucky, you'll be getting a copy of The Beginning of Wisdom. All right, so Adam, let's begin. I'll start with a fun fact. Many people on this call will recognize the name Yuval Levin, who is one of Hertog faculty, longtime instructor for our summer program. And you went to high school with Yuval, and then you both ended up at American University here in DC, as befits two young political junkies. And you guys both did stints on Capitol Hill, but from there, you guys have both had really more interesting and varied careers than most political types. Yuval is the editor of National Affairs and a scholar at AEI, and you've had this long career as a writer and editor. So tell me a little bit about how you ended up in journalism. Was this a career that you fell into by luck or maybe by accident, as the case may be?
Yeah, that's a great question. Before I answer that, let me say thank you, Cheryl, for having me here. Thank you to the Hertog Foundation for all its work, which I admire. It's very important work that it's doing. And thank you to everybody who's tuning in. I look forward to your questions. I want this to be a discussion that's helpful and useful to you. So if we get to your questions sooner rather than later, that'll be fine by me. And if we have more things to talk about than time permits, I'd be happy to talk afterwards with any of you by email or Zoom. So yeah, no, that's an interesting question. I have known Yuval for a long time. Yuval Levin and I went to, not just high school, we went to middle school together. So middle school, high school, college together, and then we worked together for many years. For many, many years, we were fellows together at a think tank, and he was editing one magazine, National Affairs, and I was editing another magazine, the New Atlantis, while we were on opposite sides of a wall. So, we could just pop over into one another's offices anytime and talk about our writers and the magazines and what we were running, the world of ideas. And yeah, I mean, the question you asked, Cheryl, about whether we intended to be journalists, I don't think either of us really intended to be. I don't think either of us really quite thinks of ourselves as journalists. We're both involved in journalism, though. I guess I would put it this way: he and I have both had careers that are not really easy to replicate. I mean, there has been a lot of chance and luck. you can't really look at the career paths that we've taken and say, I want to do exactly what that person did, but you can say, I want to kind of follow something along the lines of the ideas and principles that animated that person's career. In my case, after studying at American University here in DC, not long after graduating, I decided I was going to start a think tank, which is a crazy thing to do. This was maybe 6-7 months after graduating, but I decided I was going to start a think tank. I had worked at some think tanks while I was an undergraduate. I had worked on Capitol Hill. I'd worked for little publications. But in my very first job after college, I was working for the lobbying office of a big corporation. And because this was 1999 and I was 21 or 22, they said to me, your portfolio, your lobbying portfolio is going to be technology, because the internet was still fairly newfangled. And so that was what I worked on. I worked on tech questions. And I realized pretty quickly that a lot of the people I was talking to on Capitol Hill, in various trade associations, didn't really understand science and technology. I'd had a long interest in science and technology. I didn't study it as an undergraduate, but I'd always been interested in it. My grandfather had worked in a low-level capacity on the Manhattan Project, so I've kind of always been interested in science and technology. And so I decided I was going to start a think tank that would try to teach policymakers about science and get scientists to think a little bit more seriously about policy. And so started that not long after college. In fact, Yuval and I started that together. And after a few years, joined a group of other people in a small reading group about science and technology. And that became the basis of the magazine, The New Atlantis, which we founded back in 2003. That's where I first met you, Cheryl. And yeah, so for many years, I was running The New Atlantis. I was the editor for many years of that magazine. And it was wonderful, and I have a lot to say about that. And you can visit it at www.thenewatlantis.com. And then after that, moved over to the Weekly Standard for a few years before it died in late 2018.
Yeah.
So I've been involved with other magazines and other projects since then, as Cheryl mentioned, but it's not exactly a career path that I would recommend most people try, right? You shouldn't try to start a think tank just out of college unless you are a really extroverted millionaire, which maybe some of you are, but unless you are, I would not advise that as a career path.
Yeah, so to follow up a little bit, in your career as an editor and writer, you've always worked for political magazines, and that just means not just magazines which take politics as one of their main subjects, but were also partisan, that sought to advance a set of ideas or a worldview. And yet you've avoided getting mired in kind of, the dull and predictable clickbait style of journalism that now unfortunately characterizes so much political writing. So how did you manage that? And what advice would you give to young writers out there who want to write about politics, but in a more capacious way? And unfortunately, I fear the answer cannot be born before the advent of social media, since students can't do very much about that at this point.
Right. So that's a great question. I think it is a constant challenge for writers from any kind of publication to find a way to balance your political commitments and beliefs, to find a way to balance them with intellectual seriousness. And basically, you have to admit at a certain point that your beliefs, your prior commitments, the things that you enter any journalistic investigation, any kind of writing, anytime that you start to study a subject, you have to be willing to accept that you're wrong, which ties into one of my 10 rules for how to succeed as an intellectual in Washington or in the policy realm, which I'm happy to talk about later. But basically, you have to be willing to concede that your political beliefs might be wrong, might be ill-founded, might be confused in some way. And if you're willing to do that and to to find a way to have the intellectual integrity and find a place that's willing to let you have intellectual integrity, then you're very lucky. But sometimes it's a fight, and it's hard to find a way to keep your intellectual integrity while being able to feed yourself, while being able to make a living. Because a lot of the publications, as you suggest, Cheryl, a lot of the publications out there are either so ideological or so, as you say, partisan. The difference being ideological being committed to a certain set of ideas, partisan meaning committed to a certain certain faction or a certain political party and its success. So many publications are so ideological or partisan that it can be very difficult to keep your integrity. So you've got to find a way, if you really if you want to keep your intellectual integrity, you've got to find a way to carve out some space there. I've been very lucky to have spent most of my career at publications that I was either running or that, you know, were founded before me, but had already had a real commitment to intellectual integrity, and gave me and my colleagues a lot of room to run and to change our minds and to learn. But that's not something that we can take for granted. So to anybody wondering about this and thinking about this today, my advice would be to just go into this with open eyes, and before you take any job, to have clearly any job in journalism, any job in writing, any job in editing, to have clearly in mind some boundaries, to go into it saying with open eyes and saying to yourself, maybe even write this down. For some people that's useful. Say, I'm not going to stay at this place if I'm asked to do X, Y, and Z, and just set some clear boundaries for yourself. That has been helpful for some people I know who have ended up leaving publications where they were asked to say things they didn't believe in, or to push ideas that they believed to be wrong.
Well, a more practical question. So as an editor, and you've edited so many different kinds of pieces, you know, more breaking news kind of items, so, you know, short capsules, book reviews, long feature pieces and ideas essays. But when you're reviewing a submission or a pitch from a new writer, what do you look for? What qualities convince you to keep writing or keep reading rather than just moving on to the next piece in the slush pile?
Yeah, sure. So if you don't know the term that Cheryl just used, slush pile, when you're running a magazine, when you're the editor of a magazine, you get some pieces that you publish are pieces that you have commissioned yourself, that you've asked the writer to send you. And those pieces you can develop with care. You have a lot of back and forth with the writer, but other pieces come in unsolicited, or the phrase goes over the transom. And often those pieces just go into what's called the slush pile. You get, you know, sometimes a dozen a day, depending on the size of your publication. Sometimes you get, you know, you get a bunch of them at once, and then things fade off. Depends on just the cycle of your publication. And somebody has to go through those. And, you know, there are some publications that will reject everything in the slush pile because they will only work with writers that they already know and are familiar with and have commissioned pieces from. I think it's important, though, to spend some time bringing in new voices, finding new writers, and part of that is really kind of looking at the pieces that are coming in unsolicited. And so what are the things to look for in a piece from a writer that you haven't worked with? So that is a great question. I've been lucky to work with some very established writers and thinkers over the years. I have edited, I was thinking about this recently. So I have edited pieces from, let's see, Pulitzer Prize winners, Nobel Prize winners, Templeton Prize winners, Newbery Prize winners now. And so all these kind of very established thinkers and writers. But some of the most memorable pieces that I've ever worked on have been pieces from writers I'd never heard of, including writers who were in college or just out of college and had never been published before, and who were, for the first time, starting to flex their writerly muscles. so what do I look for? I look for really two things. I look for words and ideas. I mean, it sounds kind of trite, but here's what I mean by that. When I say words, I mean I'm looking for a voice, or I'm looking for somebody who knows how to use language, somebody who has something interesting and captivating to say, or a way of saying things that's interesting and engaging and captivating. Especially if you're going through a ton of pieces in the slush pile, you really don't want to. You don't want to be in a position where you just you're sending pieces to editors, and you just have no style at all. You know, you want to have something that stands out in how you write, but also you want to look for somebody who has a mind, who has ideas, who's thinking, who's making an argument. Never send a piece to any editor anywhere if it doesn't make some kind of argument, if you don't disagree with somebody. I can tell you there are easier than the things that a piece should include are the things that are the turnoffs, right? What are the things that will instantly turn off an editor? And so that's easy, right? It's probably pretty similar to some of the advice that you have heard over the years about essays in class, or even you know, college admission essays. Right, start with this. You don't want there to be obvious typos. You don't want there to be obvious factual errors. You don't want there to be obvious formatting errors, because obvious formatting errors suggest somebody was sloppy about things like formatting. That suggests a kind of, it betokens a more general sloppiness of mind and style. And you don't want there to be, look, I would be irked if I saw a piece by a young, unqualified writer that was trying to bite off more than that writer could chew. And here's what I mean by that. Young writers often want to be generalists. They want to write very broad pieces that touch on, you know, subjects that are of huge national importance, but they're often not qualified to really grapple with those questions. I would be much more interested in a young writer who was a specificist, a particularist, somebody who was really engaging in depth on something narrow. That would be of more interest to me. So lots more to say about all that, but those are a few tips of things to stay away from and things to watch for when writing to editors. And I could say much more about how to pitch editors, how specifically to reach out to editors for the first time, if anybody's interested in that later.
Sure. So I do want to follow up on that. So you're a young writer, you're just starting out and you have no connections. You want to get something published. You've maybe published for your college newspaper, maybe for a student journal that you help run, but otherwise, like, you don't actually have any clips, and you don't have any relationships with anyone. How do you get started out?
Yeah, so that's much easier today than ever before, really, for a few reasons. One is it's just pretty easy to get a hold of the people who run different magazines. You can find the email addresses of editors. You can find email addresses and directions on submissions. Most publications don't care today about questions of format, or don't care that much. They may say they care, but it doesn't really matter that much, right? You know, it used to be that publications would be super strict. When I was 20 plus years ago, they would say things like, you can only send us pieces in Microsoft Word or Word Perfect, this version or above, and they have to be double spaced and they have to be in this font. None of that matters now. Just send the piece in. But what I would do, I think, generally the pitches that I get that are of most interest to me from writers I've never heard of don't go into great detail about who you are and who you know. You want to signal a couple things, though. You want to signal this: familiarity with the publication, right? So find some way of making clear to the editor that you're talking to that you know the publication that you're pitching to. You're not going to send a piece that's really better suited to Sports Illustrated to you know, Science magazine, right? You're gonna want to make sure that you absolutely want to reach out to just the right kind of magazine and make clear that you understand the magazine that you're reaching out to. So signal that in your email in some way. If you have any kind of connection, it's fine to mention it, but you don't want to do a ton of name dropping. There's no need for that, and you don't need to do a lot to really say, here's why you should publish my piece. Just a couple sentences saying why you think it matters and what the argument is that you make. That's really all you've got to do. Say why it's timely and what your argument is. And if you can do that, it will get a place in the slush pile. It won't be rejected out of hand, and it's more likely than not that it'll get looked at. So it's a much simpler process today than it was not that long ago.
I love editors, but they are sometimes hard to reach. And you send them an email, you send them a piece, and it's crickets. And you're like, did they get it? Do they not like me anymore? What happened?
Yeah.
So what is the oh, go ahead.
No, that's a great point. So editors are busy, very busy people, and there are some editors who are really great about responding to every email they get the same day. I've been lucky enough to work with some of them. There are some editors who respond to their email once a month, and it's the end of the month, and they just take the last day of the month and they go through their inbox. There are editors who are at every level of responsiveness, and then there are some who the way that they respond to people, to writers with concerns is simply, whichever gnat is buzzing in their ear on a given day, they'll respond to when they get a minute. Which is to say, don't be shy about reaching out to your editor, to an editor a second time and asking, hey, just wanted to re-up this, wanted to make sure this didn't get buried in your inbox, wanted to make sure that you saw this. But there are certain rules that it's really helpful for a young writer to know. And the most important of those rules is not to try double dipping a piece. You absolutely should not send the same piece to more than one editor without making that absolutely clear to the editors you're sending it to. So in other words, if you have a piece and you have three publications in mind that you might be the right fit for it, first of all, that's a bad idea in general. But if you really feel that you have to do that, say to each of the editors that's what you're doing, because you will get blacklisted if you. This happened to. I had to do this to a writer just a couple weeks ago. You'll get blacklisted if you send a piece to an editor, and then the editor starts to work on it, and then you decide you want to pull it because you've sent it to another place that you would rather have it published. That's the kind of thing that will get you on a blacklist. So don't do that. Stay away from that. Be upfront about all these things. And you obviously don't want to be too much of a nudge. You don't want to be writing to an editor every day saying and you don't want to be too stressed out about these things. You don't want to say, I know it's hard. You put your energy and your time into writing a piece, and it can be really difficult to be patient with with a busy editor who's not very responsive. And so feel free to write to the editor again and again until you get a response, but not like every day. Maybe give it a few days between so the person can have a chance to respond. Because you have to remember, again, every publication is different. Some publications have really tiny staffs, and it takes a while for the editors to get around to responding to authors, especially for long pieces. You can't send a 5,000-word piece into a small staffed magazine and expect to get a quick turnaround, a response right away. You usually can't.
Excellent. All right, we got a lot of questions coming up in the Q&A, so why don't we turn to our audience. Mary Elizabeth will be sending those my way. In the meantime, we have another book raffle, which Nico will announce on the chat. And we're going to have 3 winners, very lucky winners, because one is going to get Alan Bloom's Shakespeare on Love and Friendship. Another winner is going to get Our Great Purpose by Hertog instructor Ryan Hanley, also one of the teachers at Humanities at Hertog. And then this final winner for this raffle is going to get a copy of Glaucon's Fate by Jacob Howland, who is teaching demons. So Nico will be sending that along. And then I think our first question is from Catherine Loof. And she's from Baylor. So Nico is going to make her magically appear. Oh, it looks like it's happening. Hi, Catherine.
Hello. Am I like good? I don't
You look good. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I was just wondering, like, in an almost unprecedented era of social media and like Instagram influencers, and just where anything can go viral at any given time, whether it's true or not, what does it mean to write about politics, and what does it mean to write and edit a political magazine where you like facilitate these discussions, but you don't know how many people you're going to reach, compared to like one tweet that will get, 100,000 likes?
Sure, that's a very good question. So there are a lot of things I could say in response to that, but thank you for asking it. One thing your question touches on is the matter of truth in information and disinformation, whether things are factually accurate or not, and how they can circulate really rapidly. I'll mangle the quotation, but there's the famous line about a lie being able to travel the world many times before the truth can even pull on its pants. That's more true today than ever before. At the same time, we have a richer and more complicated understanding today of facts and where they come from, thanks to more information, more accurate information being at our fingertips than ever before. So we have all at once these incredible tools that help us understand a more complex world and to explain it more richly than ever before. And yet at the same time, we've got these tools that allow us to reach huge audiences based not on deep and rich and complex engagement with facts, but on superficial kind of flame-throwing, kind of feisty fighting half-truths. And that's one of the paradoxes of the moment that we're in right now. It's possible, as you say, for a tweet to get an enormous amount of attention, a tweet hastily composed and possibly not true to get an enormous amount of attention, and for the product of many hours of laborious fact-checking work to reach only a small audience, and that's just one of the cruel realities of the publishing moment. Now, if we take a step back and we think about this for a while, there are some ways in which that paradox, while it's worse, while it's exacerbated today, we've been living with that paradox forever. I mean, this is kind of it's a truism of politics and human society that it is harder work to explain reality and understand reality and explain and make cogent, clear, philosophically and morally serious arguments. That's harder work than reaching a big audience through half-truths. I mean, there's a reason that there is so much interesting philosophical and political literature about demagogues and about people who are willing to spread falsehood and half-truths in order to win power or at least win audiences. So, in terms of bringing this down to like the level of careers and thinking about writing today, all I would say is it's extraordinarily important if you believe in the power of facts, if you have epistemological commitments to there being a real world, a reality, and that we would improve our lives by trying better to understand it, then it's incumbent on you as a writer and as a thinker to get your facts right. This is another one of my 10 or so rules on how to succeed as a writer and an intellectual. It's really important to go out of your way to understand the full complexity of the subjects you're dealing with and to get your facts right. And that means not only doing your own research, but also working with people who are rigorous about these things. Don't work with publications that have no fact-checking process. Don't work with publications that have a reputation for having published people who are sloppy or are, you know, untruthful. Work with places that are good about these things, that are careful and rigorous. And if you have a question about that, ask. If you are interested in writing for a publication and you're not sure what their fact-checking policies are, find out ahead of time. Say, look, I'd really love to publish this piece. I'm glad you're interested in it, but could you tell me a little bit about what your fact-checking process is like? Because I think I'm solid here, but I would really prefer to have the backup of a rigorous fact-checking process. And any editor worth his or her salt will be candid and upfront about that and tell you, we do this kind of fact-checking, we don't do any fact-checking, we rely on our authors. If you don't get a clear response about it at all, I'd be wary. So that's a most of an answer to your question, but as I say, your question is actually a really huge one. I'd be happy to talk more with you about it afterwards if you'd like.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you, Catherine. All right, I just want to make sure our raffle winners from this last raffle know Sarah George, Will Galloway, and Jameson Hearn. You were winners, so make sure that you reach out to Nico to claim your prizes. All right, next question is from Erica Daly at Furman University. Erica.
Hi, can you see me?
Yep.
Okay, great. Oh, I can't see my question anymore. I'll try to remember off the top of my head. How do you create a broad appeal in your writing and establish an ethos with the reader in our current environment that has so much negative partisanship?
Sure, that's a good and an interesting question. I think the most important thing that you can and have a real rapport with people who might agree with you or disagree with you, either way, is to become expert in something. Is to learn a subject inside and out, and to really not try to understand all of everything, but try to understand all of a few things. That way, you'll not only win the friendship and admiration of editors who will turn to you when they need someone to write on that subject, but also of readers, because you will be known as the person to go to who writes on this subject and in this way. It's possible to become, I was talking earlier about the difference between writers who are generalists and writers who are specificists. It's possible to be a great generalist. Most generalist writers actually started out as specificists, as people who understood some subject or subjects really intimately, really well. I think there's real value in becoming a writer who knows something well. After that, you start to build your audience because people will come to you, they'll seek you out. But it's otherwise, it doesn't make a lot of sense to try to build an audience just kind of floating in space, around your name, your opinions. A second thing that you can do to become known and build a reputation is to ally yourself with people who have certain clear reputations. By that I mean join forces with other writers and with magazines that already are known. We're in I'm going to get on one of my hobby horses now. We're in an unusual moment where young writers are not starting magazines as often as they used to. It used to be, even 15, 20 years ago, it used to be that if you were between the ages of 20 and 27, maybe 30, and you had some idea and a bunch of friends had the same idea, you'd start a magazine. It became really easy to do this around the turn of the century. Super easy to do this. But for some reason, for lots of reasons that I'd be happy to go into, that doesn't happen as much anymore. And it's not that all of those magazines were good, but many of them weren't. Most magazines, statistically speaking, but it was a way of joining forces with a group of like-minded people and working out your ideas and raising one another's profiles and really fighting with one another and learning from one another. And a magazine, in 2018, I spent a lot of time talking to a lot of people about starting magazines, a lot of wealthy people, a lot of donors, a lot of foundation people, to try and think through the moment that we're in for magazines. And a lot of them told me that they think, we're at a moment in public. Go to social media, start putting up explainer videos on YouTube, start using Snapchat. Nobody actually said using TikTok, but that's because this was 2018 and early 19. I bet today if I talk to these people, they'd say TikTok. Start a podcast. That's fine. All of those things are great and important in each of their own way. That's fine. But a magazine remains the best way for a group of people to engage with and fight with and learn from one another. And in that way, and at the level of intellectual rigor that only writing can provide. And in that way, a magazine is not, as some of these people I was talking to suggested, it's not backwards looking, it's the opposite. It is fundamentally our most forward-looking tool for thinking, for doing intellectual work at a high level. It's not outdated. It can't be outdated. It just, there are parts of the business model that can be very outdated and hopefully will be replaced by new, more successful business models. But as a tool, the magazine is still the best way for us to think together.
Thanks, Erica. And
Thank you.
I can just jump in maybe a little, Adam. Become an expert sounds intimidating. Like, what does that mean? Does it mean I have to get a PhD? I have to become, a master of some arcane discipline? Starting out as a writer, actually, when I was working for you as an intern, I started working on assisted reproductive technology. I knew nothing about it when I first started it. And the way that I got started actually was reviewing a bunch of books that had recently come out on the topic. And like, once you review 3 or 4 books on something, then editors look and say, oh, that's what Cheryl Miller does. And so I needed somebody to review a book. I've already read a number of recent books, so I have a sense of, the arguments out there. I'm a great person now to commission a piece for. And then the other way was just, reporting, calling people who actually were experts and getting them to tell me what they know, but weren't necessarily great at explaining it to a general audience. And so again, I was kind of a translator. I don't know if you have anything to add on that, Adam, but I do want to make sure that young writers who are out there don't think like, well, I'm not an expert about anything, so like, does that mean I can't write anything? You accept that tacit consent?
That's a great question. That is a great question. So first of all, you're exactly, that's very well put. And I'll say 2 things about it. So first, yes, book reviews are great. I encourage young writers to write book reviews. I have published, hundreds of writers who had never been published before and whose first pieces were book reviews. And the great strength of book reviews is that they are, you don't have to know everything about the subject, as you're suggesting, Cheryl. You don't have to know everything about the subject before you dig into it. My rules for writing book reviews are pretty useful here in helping to think about this whole enterprise, the writer and intellectual. Like, my rules for writing book reviews are this. If you're going to write a book review, you need to explain what the author's intentions were. You need to explain charitably how well the author met those intentions. So on his or her own terms, you need to very charitably say this person succeeded or failed. And then you need to pick some kind of fight with the author, or fight with the book, or fight with the world. It doesn't matter, but you need to make some kind of argument. Even if it's a book you love, you need to pick a fight, maybe say the book was too short, it should have been 500 pages longer, but you need to pick some kind of fight. Those are the rules for a book review. What that means is, if you are a young writer who is not super expert in the subject, you know, that's a great reason to write a book review, because 70–80% of what you need to know to write a book review is in the book itself. You don't need to bring an enormous amount of outside expertise to write a really good book review. And there are tons of different ways that a book review can work. A book review can be a long essay. It can focus narrowly on the book. It can focus on the subject. It can focus on the writing style. There's a million different ways that you can do a book review, as long as it satisfies those basic rules of explain the author's intentions, how well did the author meet them, and then pick some kind of fight. So yes, book reviews are great, but how, to your other point, Cheryl, how do you become expert in something? As you say, it's about finding something that you're interested in and learning a lot about it. How do you learn a lot about it? You read books, you ask questions, you talk to people. So there are, to be honest, I am a deep, deep expert on maybe 4 subjects in the whole world, right? I'm a little bit of a generalist. I've edited people on tons of different subjects, but there are really only maybe 4 or 5 subjects that I could have, you know, a real deep conversation with other like world-class experts on those subjects and hold my own. Really very few subjects like that anybody can do. But I would encourage writers to find those things. Find the things that interest you, learn whatever there is to learn about them. And it's not super intimidating once you start, once you actually start digging into a subject. But it can, as you say, Cheryl, it can be really intimidating finding the thing, figuring out the thing that you should become expert in. That's really where the intimidating part is. I remember dealing with one writer some years ago who was trying to figure out, should I become an expert in environmental policy, or should I become an expert in this arcane area of procedural law, or should I become an expert in, and you know, trying to kind of game it all out and figure out what the best career path as a writer would be. Should I be expert in this, that, or the other? And my advice to most young writers in that situation is, what interests you? Find what interests you. And figure it out and follow your interests first, and become expert in those things, the things that, you know, that speak to something inside you.
All right, next question is going to be from Carolyn Stewart, who is a Hertog alumna.
All right, great, fantastic. Hi guys, hi Adam. So my question for you is, it seems like if you are an arts and culture writer in the DC area, it's kind of a lonely place. You know, it's not New York. It's not super happening, but there's so much that is out there. And so my question is to you is, could you just give us a lay of the land? Like, what are the publications, journals, outlets that are taking arts and culture pieces? Who should we be trying to get to know better and setting our sights on for pitches?
Okay, so your question broke up in the middle, but I'm going to repeat what I take to be the essence of it, and you tell me if I've got it right or not. I hear you to be asking, you know, who are some editors and some publications that you should get to know, that you should be pitching things. Is that the essence of your question, or was there more?
That's the heart of it. Yeah, who should we be bugging right now? Yeah.
Sure. So I'm happy to talk with you about that by email some more, Carolyn. But you know, write to the editors of the publications that you read, the ones that you care about, the ones that you spend your time reading, and the ones that publish the kinds of things that you care about. And you know, look, if there, as I said, it used to be that if there wasn't the publication that you wanted in the world, you'd make one. And in some ways that's easier than ever before. In some ways it's harder. But you know, at the very least, find the editors of the publications that you like and reach out to them and get to know them. I'm happy to talk with you some more about this by email, though. You know, it really depends on exactly what you're interested in. And I guess I would only add one other thing. Don't write off publications that you think are not a good fit subject-wise, or that you think might be too serious or advanced, or don't poo-poo them as possibilities, because many fine publications, will take pieces from good writers that they've never heard of, and also many publications that seem to have kind of niche will actually take outside the box suggestions. I see Cheryl is putting in the chat links to a whole host of interesting publications. Those are good suggestions. I have, I don't know, 50 more that I'd be happy to send you. But it's just don't foreclose possibilities before you actually pitch them, I would say. Happy
Great.
to talk more offline.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Yeah, so maybe just give some names. Carolyn is obviously well established. She knows about everything, a lot of the publications, but a lot of the young people who are listening in don't know about these magazines. And so they need to know what they should be reading so they know what they should be pitching. So anything you want to suggest? I put out there in National Affairs, Commentary. I like The Point, which is a kind of quasi-academic cultural magazine out of Chicago by young writers who just started a magazine. I also like Law and Liberty, which has a lot of the quasi-academic content, which many of you will love. Anything else, Adam, that you would suggest?
Yeah, sure. They divide into different kinds of publications. There are publications that are more on the intellectual side, publications more on the politics side, more on the policy side, and it depends on really what your interest is, and you're going to have to find some that bridge them. So yeah, some that you've suggested in the chat are great. There's Tablet, there's The Point, there's The New Atlantis, there's the American Purpose, or just American Purpose. There's certainly Commentary, there's First Things, and each of these is very different in tone and in audience. You really need to get a sense of what the publication is before really engaging with the writers. For certain kinds of more intellectual, more academic type writers, there's The Point, but there's also Hedgehog Review, which is really wonderful. For writers who are of a religious bent, there are a host of publications. There are book reviews that tend to focus explicitly on books, whether you're talking about the New York Review of Books, the Los Angeles Review of Books, other Lit Hub, the Jewish Review of Books, just an enormous number of publications, and it depends on what your interest is. And there's nothing wrong with being omnivorous in your reading, and there's nothing wrong with being ambitious in the pitches that you send out. But as I said very early on in this conversation, it's important to make clear when you deal with the editors of a publication that you know what that publication is. So don't reach out to the editors of a publication that you've just heard of tonight and start sending them pieces. Drink deeply of their archives before reaching out to them, so that it's clear that you have a familiarity with what they do.
Absolutely, and I have a list as well of magazines, which I would be happy to share with anyone. You can always just email Nico and I can make that available. And that's also something that's part of the Hertog Alumni Network, which is we suggest things to read, and we also try and get people plugged into the conversation so they can also be part of it. All right, so next question is from Teresa Ramsey of Wyoming College.
Hello. Yeah, I was actually just wondering whether you had any advice regarding writing methods. Do you have any writing methods or techniques that you've noticed from a lot of student writers that might work really well for professors, but not so well for editors?
That's great. That's a very good question. So we're in an unusual moment here in the world of reading and writing. We're in a moment where if you ask people how they read and how they write, if you ask them for the specifics of how they read and how they write, and if you ask 50 different people, you will get 50 very different answers from one another. I spent a long time over the last several years asking, how do you find the things that you want to read? How do you hold on to them until you have the time to read them? How do you actually go about reading? And how do you write? What time of day? What processes do you use? And there were far fewer answers 20 plus years ago than there are today. It's just a wild diversity. And look, there are some things that you are taught in the classroom that can be really helpful, including make an argument. And some of you will probably have heard some version of the tell them what you're going to tell them, then tell them, and then tell them what you told them, right? So that can be useful up to a point, but it really depends on the best way to become a good writer is by reading and writing. The best way to become a good writer is by reading good writing and by trying to write well and doing a lot of it. There's no better way. You read and you write, and that's how you become a good writer. And so you will find that all of the things that work for your professors will work for some editors, but many others it just won't. Academic publishing might be willing to accept some of the kinds of things that work really well in the classroom. But there are other kinds of writing that don't work that well, right? Or that don't work that way. Some of the tricks that you learn in journalism classes, or if you work for a school newspaper or have ever worked for any kind of media venture, some of those tricks work in other contexts, including tricks about thinking about how to structure what you're doing. And the most important thing to do that as a writer that is not taught in the classroom, and is not, to be honest, is not always taught well in journalism schools either, is to put yourself in the mind of the reader who's not familiar with what you're writing about, and to hold their hand and guide them along. And what that means varies from piece to piece, but another way of saying that same thing is something like this. Even when you are writing something that is analytical and has a lot of numbers, even when you're writing something that is largely opinion-based, find a way to tell a story. Find a way to tell a story. So that means what? Sometimes it means simply arrange things in a kind of chronological order and make your argument unfold naturally. Sometimes it means literally work a narrative element, some kind of story into the thing that you're telling. But it's really important to to put yourself in the mindset of the reader, and that means a logical sequence, and often that means a chronological sequence, and that means storytelling. And there's nothing that will engage a reader or an editor more than some kind of engaging, gripping story, even if it's in the context of an opinion piece, of an argumentative piece, of an analytical piece. Some kind of story helps immensely. And that's something that, as I was saying, again, is not really applicable in most college classroom writing, and is not really applicable, is not really even taught well in all journalism schools. But find a way to work a story into what you're doing.
Thank you, Teresa. All right, we're approaching time. We've got time for one more question from our audience, and that's going to be Sarah George, a Hertog alumna from Georgetown University. Hi, Sarah. You're muted still. Great.
Sorry.
I do it once every conversation.
Thank you so much for doing this. One thing I'm curious about is you've had obviously an extensive career in journalism, and because it's journalism, going to be a pretty obvious and accessible paper trail. And presumably you've edited or even written things that you would maybe not be super keen to fully endorse now. And what would be your advice for writers who, even though we're young, we might have said something foolish or that we would like to distance ourselves from? How should we go about it? Is there grace in the journalism community?
That's a great and complicated question. And So before I answer it, let me just say a couple things. First of all, let me just say, since this is the last question, let me say thank you to everybody for listening in. I'm very grateful to everybody. And if anybody needs to reach me or wants to talk about any of this at greater length, Cheryl can give you my email address. I'm happy to talk with everybody and to discuss any of this. I'm especially grateful to all of you because I know how busy you are and what a complicated time this is. I hope you're all well and happy and healthy, and that you all have a good Thanksgiving. So on to your question. That's a great question. Another one of my kind of rules for how to succeed today as a kind of thinker, as an intellectual, as a writer, is to not write things, be willing to keep your name on in public, that you would not be willing to be associated with years from now. That doesn't mean that you can always game that out and figure it out, but it's important to try to have in mind whenever you write something that it's probably going to be around forever. And even your even dumb and juvenile things that you wrote when you were in college, or God help us, in high school or younger today, all those sorts of things stick around. People in my position, people who've hired people or who have made decisions about whether or not to run pieces by authors, will often Google the writers that we haven't heard of before. We'll often Google them and just try and find out what they've done before and what they've written. And I'm not gonna lie to you. We will make decisions sometimes based on that. If we see that somebody has written something for us, that they pitched us something that seems very sensible, but we find that in digging around, they have said some very stupid or very evil things in the past, we have to make a judgment call about whether we want our publication to be associated with them. And very often the answer is no, it's just too much trouble, it's not worth it. That doesn't mean that there isn't some grace, that there isn't some forgiveness, that there isn't some leeway. And if we find that somebody has written something, pitched us something that's very smart, but said something that, was ill-advised, but not evil, maybe, defensible, but stupid in the kind of way that we all are stupid when we're young, then we're happy to kind of find a way to work with somebody. But that is a real difficult question. Look, even though many things do seem to last forever, and with intensive Googling, we can find lots of things that you've said in the past. Other things do kind of disappear and fade from the internet with time, and with luck, the worst of our stupidities will over time fade away. But then there remains this other related question, which is, what if it's not a matter of something you've said while young, while immature, while not thinking, but if it's something that you've said recently, and that matters too. If a writer is a very sober, serious person and comes across that way when pitching a piece to an editor, but then has a social media persona that is combative and that prefers hot takes and owning people rather than engaging seriously with other people's ideas, that is going to go into the calculation too of editors about whether they want to work with such a person, whether they want to have their publication associated with such a person. So, there is no easy answer other than what you've already intuited and what's obviously already inherent in your question, which is you can do your best going forward to try to have a real consistency and integrity in what you write in different modes. And the only other thing that I would say about it is is that you should try to be transparent. That's not just something that's kind of value today because of technology and the mode that everybody wants transparency and authenticity, but it ties into integrity. So don't be don't try to hide things. There was a piece recently published in one of our country's greatest magazines, The Atlantic, and the editors of that magazine and the author obscured the name of the author of the piece. They allowed the author to use her married name rather than her unmarried name, her maiden name, which they did on purpose because this author asked it, because that author had been involved in a serious plagiarism scandal more than 2 decades ago, and she wanted to move on and not have people read this piece thinking that she was the same person who had been that plagiarist. Well, guess what? That author, in this piece in this major magazine, that author didn't plagiarize, but she was a fabulist. She made things up. She in fact asked one of her sources in this major magazine article to lie about the facts that were being reported. And the magazine had to not only publish a major apology and correction, but ended up actually retracting the piece, which is very rare in a popular magazine. It's very rare for a piece to ever be retracted. My point in telling you that story, which some of you have probably already heard of and followed, my point in bringing that up is just transparency matters immensely as an editor and as a writer, and you oughtn't to try to run away from things. You can apologize, you can clarify, but don't try to obscure, because things will generally find a way to come out at a moment that is as incommodious as possible. So I just want to say thank you, Sarah, for that question. Thank you, Cheryl, for hosting. Thank you, everybody at the Hertog Foundation audience, for listening. I'm very grateful to all of you, and I'm happy to talk to any of you who wants to after this.
Excellent. Well, I just want to quibble a little bit on your answer, Adam, because I know Fred Barnes, a great editor at the Weekly Standard, had great advice for all young writers. He would say the essential quality of any piece is doneness. And a lot of writers get like a kind of paralyzing dread, like I'm going to say something stupid. And so somebody who is perfectly capable of stringing together sentences just can't move forward because they're so afraid. And they just don't get stuff done because of this kind of perfectionism. And it does take a certain boldness to be a writer, to put stuff out and know that, you know, not every piece that you put out is going to be, you love it 100%.
I agree with that. I agree entirely with that. And I can't tell you how many times at the Weekly Standard I heard, not just Fred, but it became kind of a mantra around the office, the quality of doneness. Or to put it in terms of another expression, don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good or of the done or of the good enough. That's fine, but at the same time, the quality of doneness can create its own problems. It can mean that you're just phoning things in and getting things done rather than focusing on other kinds of excellence. So there's a trade-off there. You need to pursue the excellence of factual accuracy, which is, there's a tension between being factually correct and having something done. And there are other tensions and trade-offs. So yeah, I agree. That's absolutely right. There is a boldness that's required. There's a certain thumos that you need if you're going to throw yourself and your ideas at the world and be presumptuous enough to say that I know this and you should read it and learn from me. But at the same time, it needs to be leavened with a real humility, the kind of humility that allows you to learn about the world, to get your facts right, to agree that you can learn from people who disagree with you, a kind of intellectual humility that allows you to be charitable toward people who might, have different views, and to learn from people who are expert. And so, great writing is finding a way to balance the boldness and presumptiveness of saying, I have something to say and the world should hear me, against the intense humility that's required to bring the other kinds of excellence into your writing, the excellence of accuracy and the excellence of curiosity and the excellence of real deep learning. So there's a trade-off there and a balance there. And obviously lots to say about this in both theory and in practice.
Absolutely. Everything in moderation. I think that's a good place to end. Adam,
Right.
thank you so much for your time and your insight. We have one final raffle, and this is our grand prize. Our winner is going to receive a handsome 2-volume set of the Library of America edition of Abraham Lincoln's Speeches and Writings. So congratulations. And that is Nick Romanow, who's a Hertog alum, and I know will really appreciate this. So thank you everyone for joining us. Please take a look at hertogfoundation.org and learn more about our programs, and we hope to see your application for our Humanities at Hertog program this winter.